All right, today is March 27th, 2026. I'm Armisha Marchbanks. This is a portion of our history department, and we're going to meet about the pre-ACT scores for the 10th grade, since they will be rising juniors, and since we teach 11th grade U.S. history, we'll have majority of those juniors that do not dual enroll in the U.S. history course at college level. And so we're going to analyze the pre-ACT reading score, which is right now a 17.9. What we've noticed is within the past couple of years, this score is not moving. And so looking at the subgroups, we're just going to break down what we think is happening and come up with some strategies that we can implement going into next year, so that hopefully we can move the needle of this score because of the huge gap. All right, so for this group right here, like I said, we have this score of 17.9. And like I was talking earlier with Mr. Tony, it's not moving. And so that's a problem. And so since I teach AP, and most likely you'll be getting trained for AP, we need to figure out what we're going to do to help grow the reading score, so that we can help grow the overall ACT score.
Right.
All right. And so with that gap of 4.1 points, that even though the 4 points seem like small, it's really huge. It makes a difference. So the students are required to have a benchmark score of a 22 to get the CCRI. And what we're seeing when the students become seniors is that, they're having to take a different test or go a different route with Ms. Hicks to earn a CCRI for graduation, or even go and enroll in Calhoun for a course to get the CCRI. And so if we can go ahead and knock that out by junior year, then there'll be one less thing that they have to worry about for their senior year. And so I noticed, and everyone should have, each of you should have the document. On here, there's a weakness with arguments. When you look at purpose and point of view, they're hanging in there. When we're looking at the types of passages, though, they're not too fond of the science passage, but they like literary narrative and social science along with humanities. So social science would fall up under our department, since there's not an actual social science area on the ACT. And so I was thinking, when we're doing DBQs, because we're all looking at primary sources within the class, we're showing them to the students, like, what are they having trouble with? I know for me, my students have trouble with like breaking the argument down, trying to figure out what is the author's point of view. And so I'm trying to figure out, how can I get them to see beyond their overthinking, because that's what's happening. They are overthinking what the point of view is, as well as when you get further into it, when you think about the audience and the purpose, because they want to think that we're the audience. So what are you noticing when you show them primary?
I think for my students not being AP, the very first thing is academic language, because there's already a deficit there, and then you take it back to a primary source where they're using language differently and not being able to infer or use context clues. So we've got to get through that first before we even really get to the author point of view, so it's really breaking down the academic language part for the non-AP kids. Is what I'm saying. And
so if they don't understand academic language, when they're reading through these passages, they don't understand what they're reading. And so they're taking for the pacing on the report, our pacing is 1 out of 10 stars. Yeah. And so we need to see if we can move that maybe a star or 2 at a time, whether it be a strategy being used in class, like, locate something in a document under 60 seconds. Yeah. Can you find this? But then they have to be somewhat familiar with the context of a document. And so stressing that, reading that source information under the document is so important. And I know they have a lot going on trying to process all of this, but in order to grow, we're going to have to use different strategies. I just do not think the strategies that we're using right now that we've implemented within the school and the district is working for us as a whole. And so I thought, you know, maybe we could do that. Also, when we look at like key details and stuff, how do students perform with cause and effect for you? Do they understand that this event led to this event, or do they have the context of the event that led to the next event?
It feels like they understand the event when you're learning it, but the actual like timeline, cause and effect, and like going through, if you had to ask them to like lay it out, it would be more difficult for them to connect them in a line. Even like right now in a Cold War section, everything is so related, but they think of everything as a standalone event.
Yes.
And then move on to the next standalone event. And I try, you try as hard as you can to kind of connect those together and like call back and, but they think about them as standalone events. Even in their notes, when they're looking at their notes, if you ask them a question on an open notes test, they'll be like, oh, which section of my notes specifically was this in? Because that's how they think about it in
They're
sections.
too compartmentalized.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what can we do for that? Because even AP students have that issue too. I'm saying this is happening at the same time. You know, it's the Great Depression occurred, but guess what? Other things are happening at the same time. The New Deal is happening, and then I talk about the Dust Bowl, and they're like, wait, what?
Well,
I
like
thought we
for
were just on New
example,
Deal.
right now, like talking about the Cold War, like we, in my classes, we talked about Vietnam first, so we talked about Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and then we've come back after spring break and started back in the 60s with the Civil Rights Movement, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and it's almost like, I don't know how many times I'm repeating, this is happening at the same time. We've already talked about these people. And so it's just like, you have to really, really emphasize it. But I mean, not that they would have a ton of time to do this on the test itself, but like training their brains to doing it quickly. Like when they look at that subtext under a document or image or whatever, look at the year and then, do kind of like a mind map. What else do you know is happening? I mean, and not that we would want them to be guessing, but if at any point you can make a better educated statement or conclusion if you've kind of pulled in that external knowledge, I think, of what else is going on in the United States at this time. But
And so maybe we need to have a larger department meeting with Brinkley and the others so that we can discuss some of the strategies that need to be implemented starting at ninth grade level and all. Because if we start ninth grade, then we can just continue. If we just had a set of strategies we were using within the history department, instead of everyone doing their own thing with their strategies, at least hitting it twice a week since we're going to traditional block. And maybe that would, really reel in on those skills that they need and all. And so I also noticed like the integration of knowledge and ideas with this 35% that falls up under history department as well, analyzing those arguments, comparing the multiple perspectives. Because one of the passages, you do have two passages in reading, you do have two passages to read and compare. And so, once again, going back to the reading and overthinking, and the passages are just so long that they're getting tired of reading. They're not recalling the information that they read. And then the ones that are probably able to recall, they focus on just retelling what's happening instead of, what is this author trying to do? How is this author persuading me? The writing techniques of the author. Even once again in my AP class, when I asked for them to, analyze an event or looking at an excerpt, what's saying, they want to give it back to me word for word. And so I'm just really going to have to focus on, detail with them going into this national exam and all, and doing maybe, I thought about a scavenger hunt. I know Bomber does that with the scavenger hunts, and they seem to like that as well going throughout the building. What are some other strategies you think we could use for that?
again, like for me, not being at the AP level, with the general ed students, like the close reading, like, we just have to practice that. I mean, it's like, so, it seems elementary, but it's really not for some of these kids. And really only giving them like pieces at a time, because what they want to do is, if you say, okay, we're going to annotate this, you know, they get all highlighter happy. And so I literally have to be like, put your pencils and highlighters away. You're not doing anything. You're just reading it to read it. And kind of going back to the basics, I think, of just reiterating what close reading requires. So that I've focused on that in my classroom this year. So they've kind of got the flow of that. So we'll see.
Yeah, because they will annotate, they will highlight every
The whole
word.
thing's highlighted. Yeah.
If everything's
Yeah.
highlighted,
Then-
nothing's highlighted.
Yes. You've changed the font. Like, that's all you've really done here.
Yeah, so thinking, you know, they highlight everything. What are we pulling out here? We need to put a stop to that, somewhere within, whether it be if they're learning this in ninth grade, because you think in ninth grade, in English class, they are annotating. I know, Shelby Hawkins has them to annotate a lot, but somewhere they're missing a piece. I don't know if it's that moving from ninth grade to 10th grade, if that's where the missing link is, because by the time they get here to 11th grade, we are really, we've lost skills that they should have.
Yeah, I think too, I've noticed that like anything that's not the block of text in the middle, like they won't read. So like they'll skip over the title and the author and the date and all of that stuff. So when they ask me a question about the passage and I say, well, who wrote this? They're like, oh, and they have to go back to it. And I think that hinders their ability to fully understand the context of what they're reading and what is important to pull out. From like, say, a personal letter versus like a government document and things like that.
Because there are different sources, you know, this is an article, this is, you know, this is a speech right here. They do look over that, because that makes a difference in how you're going to respond to the questions right there and all.